we have arrived at our second Roman fort of the Saxon Shore here at Caistor. You can see that we're in the middle of what is a fairly built up area on the kind of outskirts of Great Yarmouth. The whole site here, as you can see, is surrounded by houses. In this regard, it's important to note that in Roman times we would have been not only on the coast but actually on a small island on the northern side of a large coastal estuary into which the rivers Ant, Bure, Jarl, Waveney all flowed out towards the sea. Now the sea now is over there, but what's confusing is that in Roman times the sea would have been in that direction, and this would have been the wall that looked out towards the sea. The coastal edge would have been roughly where those bungalows were, and indeed if you look carefully, the bungalows behind the row here are actually slightly lower, and that's because they would have been in the sea in Roman times. Ironically, where the sea is now is actually where the civilian settlement would have been in Roman times. If we look at this map, which I've produced for you, I don't know whether or not you can see this, hopefully you can, but basically the fort that we're at here was, as I say, on the coast, looking south. That's south that way, that's where the coast was, and therefore it was at the mouth of this great estuary, and Great Yarmouth is now essentially sitting pretty much underneath where a lot of that estuary was. Now it overlooked the third fort that we're going to go to, Caistor, and once we get there we'll look back and hopefully see if we can see it from the other side. The fort is believed to have been built initially around about AD 200, which would make it earlier than the Caistor that we're going to go and see later on. Here we are on the southern or seaward side of the fort, and there would have been probably around about here a gateway going into the fort. Also you can see, get some idea that there was also a ditch outside of this southern end. Possibly there was on the other sides as well, but there clearly was here, which suggests that unlike Brancaster, the sea was indeed slightly further off, slightly set inland in comparison to Brancaster. Moving inside the fort now, I can get up here. Moving inside the fort here, what you're going seeing here are the foundations of various buildings that would have been inside the fort. There would have been another gateway here on the eastern side, and indeed you can still see, if I get up here, that there's the remains of what is essentially an inner road within the fort. Foundations here. These would have been a mixture of basically barracks, storerooms, washrooms, bakehouses, the whole suite of accommodation that you need to keep a Roman garrison fed and watered. These buildings that have survived were actually quite late. The archaeological evidence suggests that they were not built until around about 300 AD. And indeed, one of them, you can't see the evidence of it now, I believe it's the one not by the southern gatehouse, probably where I am now, had plastered walls. Some of you may have seen pictures of the remains of Herculaneum that was covered by ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in Italy. Well, not quite as grand as that, but these had painted plastered walls as well. And what you can see here, hopefully you can see underground heating. So here is the underground heating system. Essentially the floor would have been above these chambers that would have sent hot air around, so at least some luxury for the Romans garrisoned in what they probably found was a strange country on the outskirts of the Western Empire. What's interesting is that we also know from the archaeological evidence that only about 50 years after it was built, part of this building was burnt down around the middle of the 4th century AD. We don't know why and we don't know how, but it seems never to have been repaired. We also know from finds of brooches, hairpins, necklaces, that in addition to the 500 to 1,000 men that would have been garrisoned here, clearly the fort was home, perhaps, but certainly visited by women and children. Although remember, there was a civilian settlement separate to the fort out there towards the north. None of it now remains. It's been a lot of it's been washed under the sea, but there was a sizable civilian settlement here by all accounts. So even if not living here, it's quite clear that the soldiers garrisoned here could and would have been visited by their families, perhaps. So much for Caistor. Unlike Brancaster, we can actually see something this time. We have some internal buildings and we have some of the all-important southern wall next to the sea remaining, and quite an impressive internal Roman street that leads from the eastern gatehouse, or what would have been the eastern gatehouse over here. So let's leave by that gatehouse, go and recover my bike, and move on to our next venue.